say good day to Bill Polian, former president of the Indianapolis Colts, the man who drafted Peyton Manning #1. Andrew Brandt, ESPN sports business analyst who worked in the Green Bay Packers front office. Peter Keating of ESPN, the magazine, who has covered the concussion issue incisively for a number of years. And also good day to Ricardo Martinez Cid. He's an attorney whose firm is involved in bringing several suits against the NFL. It's great to have you all here. Peter, give us a quick Reader's Digest version from your reporting of the daylight that existed back mid to late 90s between NFL policy and accepted medical practice in concussions.
Well, Bob, 10 years ago, thereabouts, two big things were happening in science. One was that research outside the NFL, based on surveys of former NFL players, was showing some links between multiple concussions and mental and cognitive and emotional problems, dementia, early onset Alzheimer's, depression, stuff like that. And the NFL committee members, the members of the concussions committee, dismissed that out of hand. Elliot Pelment went on TV and said, when I look at that research, I don't believe it, said it flatly. The other thing was that forensic scientists, starting with Bennett Amalu and then going on to famous scientists like Robert Cantu, who we've talked to many times, were starting to look at the brains of former players who had died. And they were finding chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the tangles in the brain from brain damage that comes from taking too many hits to the head. The NFL committee members also attacked that finding, in fact, tried to undermine it, and said that there was no evidence that there was any link between playing too much football and suffering CTE, so that while the commissioner now says that the NFL is leading the way, for about 10 years there, at least, while the committee was putting out these papers justifying league practices and saying there was no evidence of long-term effects of concussions, and it was okay for players to go back into games after they got concussions, the NFL was fighting, not agreeing with or leading the way for outside research.
Bill Polian, you are a man of the league. What do you say to the assertion that there was so much daylight between known science and NFL practice at that time?
Well, as the commissioner said, I think we're learning, Bob, new things every day. I've heard this statement made on other occasions, and I can tell you inside the NFL, inside the competition committee, of which I was a member for a long time, safety was looked upon as an absolutely paramount issue. And the more we learned about brain injury and concussions, the more the NFL has done to try to change the protocol and make sure that we do everything possible to treat players in the proper manner. The problem is that this is an ongoing issue. We learn more and more every day. And just as there was not arthroscopic surgery 30 years ago as an accepted practice, concussion protocol is improving day by day, and the NFL is taking every step necessary to stay on top of that.
Ricardo, understanding you're a litigant, and you certainly have a dog in this fight with your firm and your suit. What do you believe is the most important piece of evidence you can point to make your point that you believe the NFL was negligent?
Well, Peter touched on it earlier, Bob, and it's actually, if one looks at the committee that the NFL formed back in 1994, you can see that the only thing the NFL led the way on is the confusion and the disinformation. It's basically a fraud that they perpetrated on their players and on the public, so that they could stand here now and say that the science is confusing. The science that is confusing is the ones that they put out that their own doctors complained about not being inclusive of the correct data. And I mean, we can go into details as to how Pelman should never have been part of that committee, much less headed. He's a rheumatologist. What he is doing on a committee studying brain trauma is beyond my comprehension, unless you factor in that the NFL put this guy there, a disgraced doctor who had been fired from Major League Baseball for lying to Congress about his background, put him there because they knew they could get fraudulent medicine from him, a guy willing to say what it took to keep players on the field.
Andrew, how big an issue is this potentially for the NFL? They've consolidated the cases, but if you watched Roger Goodell on Friday, I'm sure he's been briefed. He's not an attorney by training, but you would have to assume he has been briefed by many about what to say, and he has been commissioner since '06, and things have certainly taken a step forward since then. But how big institutionally for the NFL are these cases?
This is a big issue, Bob. I mean, we're talking about a 10-year CBA that has just been ratified. TV deals are in place. So this may be the hot-button issue in the NFL with its players going forward. You know, I've been on both sides here. I've been an agent and I've been with a team, and I understand it. As you mentioned, things have gotten better and are getting better. The awareness is much better. In my time at the Packers, what was important to me was that we have to take these decisions out of the hands of the players, and for that matter, the coaches as well. This has to be an independent decision of the medical staff. Look at the player, decide whether it can go back. No influence by coaches and the players themselves. The problem is players, a lot of players, especially fringe players on the margin, are going to want to get back in. Even when we started baseline testing, I'd heard after the fact some players would do poorly on the baseline testing. So if they had concussion later in the year, they wouldn't perform or they'd be held out. Players are thinking about the next contract, the next practice, the next game. Unfortunately, they're not thinking about 20 years ahead. It's incumbent upon the teams and the league to think about that, and I think we've gotten better, and I know from my experience it was all in the hands of the medical staff, not the coaches of the players.
Bill, there was a report on Friday which was addressed at his press conference, and Roger Goodell discounted it and said it's not happening, but the report was that there was a league-wide initiative to put new language, a contract waiver beginning with rookie contracts this coming spring that would forswear the ability of players to sue down the line for concussion issues. If the league wanted to change the basic contract, we've just begun a new labor contract. Could they do it without going back to the union and negotiating it?
Well, individual clubs have the right to insert language in contracts so long as it's individually bargained between both parties.
Have you ever done that on a health issue with a player?
Not on a health issue, no. But I know nothing about the alleged contract language. However, I will say this, with respect to our other guests, we began with the Colts baseline testing at the behest of our club physician, who is a neurosurgeon. And he thought it was a good thing to do. He brought it to us. We said that it's your responsibility to make sure that these things are done with the utmost safety of the players involved. We did that long before, not long, but a good bit before it became the norm around the league, because our doctor was talking with other doctors around the league, team physicians who deal with the players every single day, know them, know what they go through, know the protocols involved. And our intention every single day was to make the game as safe as we could for our players and to make our players as efficient and safe as they possibly could be. So the idea that Bob, this was a fraud perpetrated by people in the NFL is, at least in my experience, is completely wrong.
Yes.
But Bob, and yet the interesting
if you don't
thing
mind.
is...
Peter, quickly.
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, the interesting thing is, while that's true, I don't believe there's been any study to date by the NFL of which teams have best practices, or which teams have reduced concussions by the most, or even where's the NFL's study on the long-term effects of concussions?
Ricardo?
Since 2005.
All right, Peter, let me quickly get Ricardo as we're short on time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about. There are good individual owners that say good things like we just heard, but I've seen the contracts that you were talking about. I believe it was the Washington Redskins who were putting in, and at least one other team, putting in language that would shock you, basically saying you as a player ought to know that you can't continue to play this game because of the head injuries you've had, and you're hereby waiving it by playing. It's shocking. And the NFL, let's remember, they did have independent studies commissioned, University of Michigan studies, that when they got results they didn't like, instead of figuring out why they didn't square with what they'd done before, they dismissed them and attacked them. All
part of a long legal challenge that's just beginning on the calendar. I wish we had more time. Bill Polian, Andrew Brandt, Peter Keating, and Ricardo Martinez Cid. Gentlemen, thank you all. And for more on this issue, read Peter's piece in the new edition of ESPN The Magazine. His work is entitled Head Cases. We'll be right back.